The 20th of November, 1943. Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. Dawn over the lagoon is the color of old brass, and the first wave is already dying. Lieutenant John Jack Crowley grips the steel rim of his hatch and tastes salt and cordite in the back of his throat. His vehicle, a squat, ugly, tracked box with a bow gun and high sides, claws forward through the pale green water, treads churning up coral sand. Every few seconds, a geyser erupts beside him as a Japanese 75mm gun slams another shell into the lagoon. Splinters patter against the armor like hail on a winter roof. He ducks instinctively, then looks up again. He can't stop looking, because ahead of him is Betio. Betio is not large, barely 2 miles long, less than a mile across. But in this moment, at 0530, on the 20th of November 1943, it is the most heavily defended patch of sand on Earth. The low shape of the Japanese command bunkers is barely visible under piled palm logs and sandbags. Anti-tank guns sit under armored shutters, waiting. Interlocking machine gun nests stitch the seawall in overlapping cones of fire. Concrete pillboxes sit just behind the surf line like teeth. And across the northern face of the island, facing the lagoon, a continuous line of barbed wire and log barricades runs behind the pier, daring anything to come straight in. "You see that?" Crowley shouts down into the troop well. He doesn't wait for an answer. He knows they see it. The Marines jammed into his LVT-1 have been stealing looks over the sides since they left the line of departure. A sergeant from K Company, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, pulls a rosary from inside his dungarees and kisses the crucifix. Another man throws up between his boots. No one laughs. Crowley's amtrac bucks hard, gouging over a coral head. For a moment it lurches sideways and he thinks, that's it. We throw a track here and we die here. In the next second the port tread catches again and the hull drags itself forward. He exhales. He grins without humor. "See?" he yells. "Amphibious tractor, gentlemen. All-terrain luxury." Nobody answers that either. 3 months ago, in a safe conference room in Truk, a Japanese staff officer called these things ridiculous. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 3rd Special Base Defense Force had studied American training films captured in the Solomons. Grainy reconnaissance footage showed odd, low, tracked vehicles plowing through surf and mangrove muck, and then crawling up onto coconut groves with squads of Marines clinging to the sides. The Japanese officers reportedly joked, "The Americans are bringing farm tractors to a war. No armor to speak of. Exposed crew. Slow, bulky, tall silhouettes. Easy to burn," one naval infantry major said, flicking his lighter for effect. They weren't entirely wrong. The early landing vehicle tracked LVTs, amtracs, alligators, take your pick, weren't designed for assaulting fortified beaches. The first ones were rescue machines, meant for swamp and hurricane work in Florida. Later versions had been reinforced, upgunned, improvised into troop carriers. But even now, here at Tarawa, many have nothing thicker than thin steel plate bolted on in the field by Marine riggers. They are not Shermans. They are not even Stuart light tanks. A .50 caliber round will go through the side if it hits right. But on November 20th, the reef has made everything else irrelevant. Because this is what the Japanese staff at Betio were counting on. They built their lagoon defenses around a simple, brutal fact of geography. There's a coral shelf that runs like a knife along the north side of Betio. At medium to low tide, it turns into a natural wall, shallow water stretching hundreds of yards out from the beach, too thin for conventional landing craft to cross. Higgins boats, the standard plywood-sided LCVPs that carried infantry ashore in the Solomons, need more depth to get their ramps onto the sand. At Tarawa, in this tide, they'll hang up on the reef. They'll stall, exposed, their Marines forced to jump into chest-deep water and wade the last 400 yards under machine gun fire. The Japanese expected that. They planned for it. They zeroed their guns for it. What they did not plan for was this: tracked amphibians that do not care about reefs. Crowley's LVT-1 shudders as it hits the coral edge. The treads bite and climb. Water sheets off the bow. Behind him, a whole wave of amtracs follows, engines snarling, climbing the reef like bulldogs, scrambling over a seawall. Some are LVT 1 second and -2 seconds. Open-top haulers with no turret, just a driver up front and a pair of machine guns on pintles. Others are the newer LVTA, -1 second. Amtanks, with light turrets mounting 37 millimeters. Cannon mobile gun platforms built on the same chassis to suppress beach defenses. Crowley watches one of those amtanks on his left traverse its turret and fire. The crack of the 37 millimeters is sharp, fast. The shell punches into a low Japanese bunker just inland of the pier. Palm logs explode outward, and for a heartbeat, he sees bodies rolling in the sand. The Marines in the well below him start yelling, raw-throated and hoarse. Not words, just sound. He doesn't blame them. 2 minutes, he shouts. But 2 minutes is an eternity at Tarawa. Ahead, one of the amtracs takes a direct hit. A column of flame jets out of the troop well. Men are screaming, clawing to get over the side, burning as they go into the water. The vehicle slews, dead in the water, then sinks, bow first, leaving a smear of burning fuel on the pale reef flat. Another LVT, maybe 20 yards to Crowley's starboard, simply ceases to exist. 1 second it's there, the next second, a Japanese Type 147 mm anti-tank gun from a camouflaged revetment near the seawall nails it low. The amtrac lifts, rips open, and drops. What's left keeps drifting forward, unmanned, like a coffin. The Japanese are not panicking. Not yet. They are disciplined, dug in, camouflaged, and they have rehearsed killing beach assaults in their heads for months. Every weapon is already laid on likely lanes of approach. Every rifleman knows where the reef is shallowest. Their doctrine says, pin them in the water, annihilate them before they reach the seawall, finish survivors with bayonet. But what doctrine does not like, what doctrine never likes, is unexpected movement. And what the LVTs are doing right now is breaking the geometry of the defense. Instead of one slow belt of helpless men wading in straight lines through waist-deep water, the first assault waves are coming in as low, armored-ish, self-propelled boxes that can shift, left or right, crawl over obstacles, and deliver Marines directly onto the sand behind the first row of stakes and barbed wire. Some amtracs are already nosing up onto the actual beach, their treads chewing into blood-dark sand and broken coral, bowguns hammering. They vomit squads of Marines who sprint, fall, crawl, fire, disappear behind the skeleton of the seawall. Crowley feels a hammer blow against his hull clang, clang, clang like someone trying to cut him open with a giant can opener. He smells hot metal. He forces himself not to duck. He has to see. He has to drive. His headset hisses. Beach! 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 The crew chief in the well is pounding on the bulkhead, signaling him forward. Hold on, Crowley yells, and jams the tiller. The amtrac lurches, bounces, slams down, keeps going. 50 yards. 30. The world is now nothing but tracers. Red lines from Japanese Nambu machine guns scythe across his bow at ankle height. White streaks from Marine. 50 seconds lashback, punching splinters out of Japanese log bunkers. A Type 92 70 mm infantry gun drops around short. The blast lifts a fan of salt water and coral gravel that peppers his face and makes his ears ring like church bells. Then, with a shriek of metal on coral and a final heave of both tracks, Crowley's LVT breaks the last of the lagoon and slams its blunt snout straight into Betio. Go, 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 go. The back deck is chaos. Marines spill over the sides, some falling, some already firing, some stopping to drag the wounded. One man doesn't get up at all. His leg is gone at the knee, and his blood looks black in the early light. Crowley doesn't have time to look. He throws the vehicle into reverse, pivoting to bring the bow gun back online. He's already thinking about run 2, because here's the quiet truth, that no one in that air-conditioned Japanese staff room at Truck really believed when they laughed at American tractors. These things can shuttle. Higgins boats can't beach on the reef, back off, reload, and punch through again under direct fire. Tanks can't swim across a lagoon, but LVTs can go back out, pick up another squad, more ammo, water cans, flamethrowers, radios, and come right back across the same killing ground again and again, as long as they're not holed. That means the first wave doesn't die alone on the sand. It means reinforcement. It means momentum. And on an island as small, as dense, and as deadly as Betio, momentum is everything. On D-Day at Tarawa, the 20th of November 1943, the Japanese garrison on Betio will fight almost to the last man. The 2nd Marine Division will take appalling casualties in just 76 hours of battle. But the only reason there are Marines alive on that beach in Hour 1 is that LVTs got them there at all. Crowley doesn't know the big picture. He just knows his hands are shaking and his throat feels like ground glass. He spits, wipes his mouth with the back of a salt-sticky glove, and snarls into his throat mic. Tractor 2-1 heading back out. From a trench carved into crushed coral and oil-soaked sand, Ensign Kaigun Shoi Nakamura Kenji of the Sasebo 7th Special Naval Landing Force lifts his head and cannot immediately understand what he's seeing. The plan was simple. Let the Americans come. Let them hit the reef. Let their boats stall. Then rake them. Drown them in the shallows before they even touch the wire. For months, the Imperial Japanese Navy had turned Betio into a machine for killing landings. The atoll's northern lagoon was charted, sounded, and pre-registered. Ranges to every probable approach lane were sketched on waterproof boards. Nakamura himself had sat in a dugout, cross-legged, sweating in the static heat, repeating his assigned distances until he could recite them in his sleep. Reef line, 280 meters. Pier head, 320. Sand ridge behind pier, 410. Palm stumps by seawall, 460. He could call fire like a rangefinder. That fire is now going out heavy. Machine guns, 13.2 millimeters. Hotchkiss Type AA weapons depressed for ground fire. Type 96 light machine guns chattering in clipped bursts, but it is not hitting helpless bodies in the water. It's slamming against metal. Nakamura wipes grit from his eyes and looks again through the slit in the log revetment. He sees low, boxy shapes crawling over the coral shelf, throwing rooster tails of spray behind them. Some of them are already on the sand, their treads clawing past the first belt of stakes. One of them is pivoting in place like a tank, and from its open troop well, green uniformed Marines are pouring out, not waiting, not crawling, but sprinting, already firing, browning automatic rifles from the hip. This is wrong. "Takai!" he snaps, pointing. "Not boats, tracked!" Petty Officer First Class Takai, his loader, slams another round into the Type 147mm anti-tank gun and spits through his teeth. "Monsters," he mutters. "Ugly American monsters." Ugly is accurate. The LVTs were never meant to be pretty. Back in Florida, before the United States was even formally at war, a civil engineer named Donald Roebling built an amphibious rescue vehicle for hurricane relief in swamps. The Marines looked at it and saw something else, a way to move men and supplies from ship to shore across bad water, mangrove, coral, marsh places where wheeled trucks would bog and boats would ground. By 1942-43, that machine had evolved into the landing vehicle tracked, crewed by Marines who wore tanker helmets and called themselves Amtrac men, half trucker and half assault pioneer. By Tarawa, those tractors weren't theory anymore. They were doctrine. The 2nd Marine Division knew the hydrology of Betio's reef was a problem. Intelligence said the tide window on D-Day was uncertain. Some staff officers believed a higher tide would float traditional landing craft all the way to the beach. Others warned the reef would stay exposed, forcing Marines to wade hundreds of yards under direct fire. The solution was brutal and simple. Use the amtracs to carry in the first waves, whether the tide cooperated or not. That decision is the only reason Lieutenant Jack Crowley is alive at this exact second. Out in the lagoon, he throttles back just long enough to check his gauges. His LVT is running hot and smells like burning oil and seawater. Shrapnel has chewed 2 ragged holes in the starboard side plate. His bow gunner is shouting that the feed on the 30 has jammed again. Crowley hardly hears him. He's staring over his shoulder at Betio as it flickers under fire like a forge. He watches Marines from his last drop vanish behind a low sand berm and not reappear. He watches a pillbox near the pier keep spitting muzzle flashes even though an amtank has already stomped almost on top of it and is firing its 37 millimeters at near point-blank range. He watches one of his sister amtracs ground out high on the coral lip, dead in the water, and men start climbing out, and then he watches those men get cut down so fast they fold like wet laundry. He swallows and forces the throttle forward again. Back out, back to the transports, back through the same artillery curtains. He's not supposed to survive more than 1 run, not really. Everyone said that at the briefing. You might get 2 across if you're lucky. After that, just do what you can. But luck, right now, feels like a thing you manufacture by being stubborn enough not to sink. The Japanese are adapting by the minute. Nakamura shifts the muzzle of the 47 millimeters gun a hair to the right. His cheek is against the trail, his hands steady. The sight picture jitters every time another Marine shell lands close, showering sand down into his firing slit. He breathes out slowly, the way his gunnery instructor taught him at Kure. He tracks an American tractor turning broadside to reverse. Range 320, he says. Fire. Takai slaps the breech closed and yanks the lanyard. The gun bucks. The round flashes out low over the lagoon, screaming toward the LVT's flank. It hits, but not where Nakamura wanted. Instead of punching straight into the crew compartment, it strikes high on the engine housing and glances, ripping metal away in a white-hot shower, but not killing the machine. The LVT lurches, coughs, black smoke, keeps crawling backward, dragging itself like a wounded animal. A geyser of tracers from its stern gun sweeps Nakamura's firing slit. Splinters of palm log erupt inside the bunker. Takai's cursing now. They're not stopping. They're not stopping. That, more than anything, is what begins to break Japanese confidence. Before Tarawa, amphibious assault, to most officers in the Pacific, meant boats. Boats have predictable profiles. Boats have to turn and beach head-on, and when they hit something, they halt. Boats leave infantry in the open water, standing upright in a killing field, easy to pour machine gun fire into. These things don't. They climb over the problem and bring the fight behind the line that was supposed to be the last safe line. By 0600, several Marine rifle companies are ashore in scattered pockets behind the seawall, held together by shouted names, hand signals, and pure aggression. They are not in pretty formation. They are not where the map said they'd be, but they are on Betio. And once Marines are physically on your island, every inch of prepared fire plan starts to unravel, because now the fight is inside the wire. That breach, that ugly, smoking, improvised breach, was made by LVTs. It is also being paid for in them. By mid-morning on November 20th, a heartbreaking percentage of the first wave amtracs are shot to pieces or burning on the reef. Many of the men who drove them will never be mentioned by name in headlines. Some drowned in their vehicles when they sank in shell holes. Some died hunched over controls, refusing to stop throttling forward even as their hulls filled with fire. But their machine, the tractor the Japanese dismissed, has just proven something you can't unsee. And across the Pacific, in other atolls, other headquarters, other air-conditioned planning rooms where maps of the Marianas are unrolled and cigarette butts are crushed into ashtrays, staff officers in both navies are already thinking the same terrible next thought. If they can do this on a strip of coral in the Gilberts, what happens when they come for the Marianas? What happens at Saipan? The 15th of June, 1944, pre-dawn, in the Philippine Sea, the flat-bottomed well deck of USS Elmore is lit by red lamps and cigarettes. The Amtrak crews are already inside their machines, engines idling low, hulls vibrating like living things. Corporal Manuel, Manny Reyes, LVT, a -4 gunner, 2nd Armored Amphibian Battalion, wipes diesel sweat off his lip and rests his hands on the turret grips of his 75mm howitzer, not 37mm like Tarawa. 75, short-barreled, low velocity, but big enough to smash log bunkers. Above his head, the open-topped turret turns with a hard mechanical whine. He can feel the ship rocking beneath him, but his world is narrowed down to the ring of steel around his shoulders and the dark, sleeping line of Saipan on the horizon. He's heard all the jokes: tractors, coffin boxes, floating sardine cans. Some guys call the LVTs alligators. Some call them buffaloes. Most call them other names you don't repeat in front of officers. The infantry grunts who will be riding his hull in about an hour crackwise that the fastest way to become a headline is to sit in one of these on D-Day. Reyes doesn't bother arguing. He just pats the side of the gun mount. "Tarawa," he says quietly into his throat mic. "They didn't say that at Tarawa, when we were the only thing moving." His vehicle commander, Sergeant Bill Harker, snorts in his ear. "At Tarawa, they didn't say anything. They were too busy puking and praying." "Yeah," Reyes says. "That too." Tarawa is part of the briefing package now. It's not a rumor. It's doctrine. In the run-up to Saipan, every officer from division level down has studied what happened in the Gilberts in November 1943. They've seen the after-action photos of Betio's lagoon amtracs burned out and half-sunk on the reef like metal corpses, but also Marines huddled behind the island's seawall in Hour 1. They've read the casualty figures. They've seen the maps that show how the first wave penetrated, how follow-on waves arriving in ordinary landing craft got hung up, slaughtered, scattered. The lesson is printed in black ink. Without tracked amphibians, the first assault echelon bleeds out in the water. With them, you get a lodgment even if it's only a few dozen yards deep and you can build from there. Saipan makes Tarawa look small. Instead of a 2-mile-long airstrip island, Saipan is 15 miles long, with cane fields, hills, swamps, and a civilian population in the tens of thousands. It matters. Saipan is in bomber range of the Japanese home islands. If the U.S. takes it, Army Air Force's B-29 seconds can hit mainland Japan. Japanese Naval Command knows this, and so do the Marines, gearing up in the well decks. That's why the Japanese 43rd Division, elements of the Imperial Navy's base forces, and coastal artillery on Saipan have dug gun pits, zeroed kill zones, and rehearsed rolling the Americans back into the surf. They are not raw. Many are veterans of the China War. Many are bitter, disciplined, and fully aware of Tarawa. Intelligence intercepts and prisoner interrogations will later make it clear. Japanese officers had studied what happened in the Gilberts and had specifically prepared to destroy the Americans in the first 10 minutes off Saipan's western beaches. They know the Americans will bring their amphibious tractors. They don't think they can stop them. They think they can kill them fast enough that it doesn't matter. Harker slaps Reyes on the helmet. "Stand by! We're flooding!" A boatswain's whistle shrieks. The rear gate of the transport starts to drop, seawater boiling in as the well deck is deliberately flooded. For a moment, everything is noise and echo and diesel. Then the LVTA -4 floats, lightens, rocks free. The driver feathers the throttles, treads already spinning in the flooded well. The tractor lurches forward and out into open water like a reptile leaving its nest. Now the ocean hits. Reyes braces his boots against the turret ring as waves slap the bow, sending warm Pacific spray into his face. Dawn is just breaking pink above the silhouettes of battleships ahead. He sees them as shadows at first, then as forms, then as muscle. Old battleships, Tennessee, California, Colorado, sitting almost motionless, their 14-inch and 16-inch rifles already spitting orange fire at Saipan's western shore. Each salvo lands inland with a delayed thunderclap. You don't hear impact so much as feel it in your lungs. Saipan is being ripped open in front of them. You can see it in the cane fields. Secondary explosions ripple inland as ammo dumps go. Columns of smoke rise like black trees. Tracer lines flicker back from shore, Japanese anti-boat guns and heavy machine guns already opening on anything that moves. And into that, in long, uneven lines, the LVTs go. On paper, this is choreography. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions are landing abreast on the west coast of Saipan, along beaches codenamed red, green, blue. Waves are color-coded and timed. Some LVTs are troop carriers, open-top LVT 2 seconds and -4 seconds, with infantry jammed inside like cargo. Some are gun vehicles, like Reyes's LVT A-4, with the 75mm howitzer turret and multiple machine guns. The theory is, amtanks lead, blasting strongpoints. Troop carriers follow, delivering riflemen straight onto the beach. Then standard landing craft bring in heavier weapons and supplies, once the first strip of sand is in U.S. hands. That's theory. In reality, it's Tarawa, scaled up, with more guns on both sides. By the time the first wave is 800 yards from Saipan's reef line, Japanese coastal guns have the range. Shells start dropping in the water, tall white plumes that sway in the morning wind like ghost fingers. Harker yells, "Down!" and Reyes ducks instinctively, only his eyes above the turret rim. A geyser erupts so close on their port side that the LVT skids in the water, slewing like a car on ice. "Still afloat!" the driver shouts. "Good," Harker says, dead calm. "Stay that way." Reyes swings the turret and sights along the barrel. Even at this distance, he can begin to pick out the shoreline. Coconut palms hammered down to splinters, busted pillboxes, anti-tank ditches carved just inland. He also sees muzzle flashes, dozens of them popping like camera bulbs all along the tree line. Tracers stitch the water around his hull. He squeezes the butterfly grips and answers with the coaxial 30, walking bright streaks back toward the beach. Behind them, a whole horizon of steel is moving. LST's tank landing ships have their bow doors open, spewing more LVTs into the sea. Destroyers are in dangerously close, hurling 5-inch shells in direct fire at Japanese shore guns. Navy dive bombers scream down inland, drop, and pull up wailing. The ocean between ship and beach is no longer ocean. It is an armored conveyor belt. That conveyor belt is what horrified Japanese planners after Tarawa. Because if you cannot stop the first wave from physically landing, then all your barbed wire, all your interlocked fields of fire, all your beautifully prepared kill zones turn from final defense into forward trench. And once Marines are behind your first trench, they start doing Marine things, flanking, burning, blasting, calling naval gunfire in behind you. You lose shape, you lose depth, you lose command. That, to the Japanese command staff on Saipan, is unacceptable. So they intend to break the conveyor belt itself. At 400 yards, Saipan starts shooting like Saipan means it. A coastal gun, probably a repurposed naval piece in a concrete casemate, opens on the left flank of the approaching waves and tears an amtrac in half. 1 second it's there, crawling, its treads throwing water, its Marines crouched low under the gunwales. The next, it's a blossom of bright orange flame and black shrapnel skipping across the surface. Reyes flinches hard enough to slam his shoulder into the turret ring. Another LVT takes a direct hit forward and simply folds. Men spill out, thrashing, helmets and rifles spinning away in the chop. Reyes's heart is hammering now. He can hear himself breathing in his own headset. "We're in the slot," he says. "We're in it now." Harker's voice is steady. "Keep that gun talking." Reyes does. The 75mm is not elegant. It is not fast. But when it lands with authority. He squeezes the trigger, feels the whole tractor kick, and watches a sandbagged Japanese machine gun nest on the beach explode into a dirty brown fountain. He rips off another round. Another. He's not counting. He's carving. And then, like at Tarawa, like a memory playing again the reef. Saipan's west coast has reefs and shallows, too. They're different from Tarawa's long coral shelf, but they're still there. Natural obstacles, jagged, meant by God and geology to break hulls and slow anything coming in. Japanese officers bet men's lives on them. If the Americans have to dismount in the water here under this much fire, in daylight, The beach will turn into a slaughterhouse. But the LVTs don't stop. Reyes feels it. The tractor's bow hits something solid, grinds, and then the treads bite. The whole vehicle lurches upward, shakes saltwater off its nose, and keeps going, its hull scraping coral so hard the sound vibrates through his boots. He laughs, actually laughs, choked and wild. "Still ugly, you sons of bitches," he yells to no one in particular. "But we climb." All along the line, amtracs are doing the same thing, walking in. Some are burning. Some are already dead in the water. Some have holes in their sides you could crawl through. But enough are making it. Enough are getting over the last natural barrier and into the surf zone where waves slap sand instead of reef. That is the moment Japanese defenders on Saipan understand something Tarawa hinted, and Saipan confirms beyond doubt. You cannot trust the ocean to stop them anymore. You cannot assume the Americans will die in the water. They are bringing their own bridge. Reyes hears Harker shout, "Stand by to beach! Stand by to!" And the rest of the sentence is torn away as a burst of Japanese heavy machine gun fire rakes across the bow, sparks flying like welding light. The LVT -4 slams forward, treads clawing, and its nose hits Saipan. For the first time, Reyes looks down the barrel of his own gun at dry land. "Go! Go! Go!" Harker roars into the radio net. "Blue 2 is on the beach." Behind them, more tractors are already churning in, dropping ramps, vomiting riflemen who spill out low and fast, yelling, firing, diving for the first low dune. And not for the last time, on the 15th of June, 1944, Japanese officers, who had once sneered at the clumsy American swamp tractors, feel the first cold edge of something close to fear. For Captain Tanaka Hiroshi, 1st Battalion, 135th Infantry Regiment, Imperial Japanese Army, the battle for Saipan was never supposed to look like this. His briefing map spread on a tatami mat in a bamboo-walled shelter 2 nights earlier, lit by a single shaded lantern to conceal light from prowling U.S. carrier planes showed a clean first phase. Phase 1, U.S. naval bombardment, estimated 30-45 minutes, neutralizes outer coast positions but cannot hit reinforced interior pillboxes. Surviving machine guns and light artillery turn the lagoon into a killing zone. Phase 2. Americans attempt landing in landing craft. Landing craft hang on reef or ground short. Americans debark in waist-deep water and advance in dense clumps toward shore. Interlocking automatic fire kills or pins them. Phase 3. Reserve light tanks and counterattack infantry move forward and finish survivors before they organize. That was the script. That was doctrine. That was how they'd practiced. Instead, Phase 1 never stopped. Naval bombardment didn't lift after 45 minutes, it pounded for hours. Old American battleships, humiliated at Pearl Harbor and refitted with radar fire control, sat offshore and hurled 14-inch and 16-inch shells with deliberate, methodical precision into Japanese coastal positions. Tanaka watched entire coconut groves vaporize. He watched strong points he'd inspected himself turn inside out in orange blossoms of pressure and splinters. He watched trenches turn into trenches full of red water. Then American carrier planes came in low and strafed the beaches again. Then destroyers crept in so close it felt obscene and raked suspected gun pits with 5-inch shells like shotguns. By the time the first wave of LVTs appeared, many of Tanaka's forward guns weren't firing anymore because they didn't exist anymore. But the plan still assumed the reef would help. The reef does not help. What Tanaka sees through his Type 93 field glasses at 0832 hours is blasphemy. American amphibious tanks treads whipping saltwater. 75mm howitzers barking are already beyond the reef. Already in the last 100 yards. Already suppressing his surviving machine gun pits with direct fire. Their ugly box hulls are smoking, scarred, scorched. Dozens trail oil and flame. But they are not stopping. They are delivering Marines onto Saipan without forcing them to wade. That means his Phase 2 is gone. That means every gun crew that had rehearsed hold fire until they're waist-deep and stumbling, is instead staring down the barrels of American howitzers at point-blank range. And that means the 10 minutes his entire defense concept depends on, are breaking. He lowers the glasses. His jaw feels tight. He no longer thinks tractor. He thinks breach. On the beach below, Corporal Manny Reyes can't hear anything except his own breathing, his own gun, and the slap of rounds smacking his hull like someone hammering steel plates with sledgehammers. His LVTA-4 is beached high, nose buried in sand and shredded palm roots. The driver is yelling that they've thrown the right tread. Harker, the vehicle commander, is yelling on the platoon net for the next wave to steer 2 lengths left. There's still an operational machine gun bunker covering a swale by a coconut stump. He's marking with tracer. Reyes is just working. Target, fire, traverse, fire. Ahead of him, a Japanese machine gun team tries to reman a sandbagged position that's been raked 3 times already. He watches them the way a gunner watches clay birds. One man in a faded field cap breaks from a shell hole, bent double, clutching the metal frame of the gun. Reyes squeezes. The 75mm lands in the nest like a dropped manhole cover. The position ceases to exist. Reload. Spent casing. Hands. Muscle memory. He's vaguely aware of Marines, actual riflemen, not amphibious tractor crew, sprinting past him, hunched low, crouched with their M1 Garans tucked in tight. Some hit the sand and start firing from prone. Some make it up to a low dune line and start shouting to each other, forming whatever you could call a line in the chaos. That right there is everything. That thin, chaotic, improvised line of living, Marines behind the first strip of sand, is the difference between assault repulsed at water's edge and lodgment established. That was true on Betio in November 1943. It is true on Saipan in June 1944. It will be true on every island after this. If even a ragged platoon of Marines is alive and shooting from dry land in the first 10 minutes, they can call naval gunfire behind Japanese positions. They can pull in more men. They can point other incoming LVTs toward gaps in the wire. They can start chewing. In the first 10 minutes, perception becomes fate. And Tanaka is watching that fate turn. He is not passive. He is not panicking. Japanese officers in the Marianas do not surrender beaches because the enemy is inconvenient. He snaps orders. He directs a reserve light tank platoon forward old Type 95 Hago tanks, fast enough on firm ground. Their 37mm guns more than enough to kill an unarmored tractor. Those tanks lurch forward through cane and smoke toward the sound of the American beachheads. And now you can see why the Marines brought not just troop carrier LVTs, but amtanks. Armor front! Harker yells. Reyes swings turret. Through the rippling heat and blowing smoke, he sees them. Squat, riveted Japanese light tanks moving along the tree line, trying to get angle on the beachhead and fire down its length. Their turrets are traversing. He can almost feel their gunners thinking, "We'll rake the beach, panic the infantry, isolate them, counterattack, drive them back into the water." He does not wait for permission. Reyes drops the sight reticle on the lead Hago and squeezes. The 75mm howitzer is not an anti-tank gun in the European sense. It's low velocity, meant for bunkers and log walls. But at 150 yards, against thin Japanese light tank armor, meant for bunkers, becomes good enough. The round hits the Hago's glacis plate. The tank jerks, belches a sheet of black smoke, then erupts from the inside in a sick, greasy orange pop. The turret lid spasms open and does not close again. Reyes whoops, raw and exultant. "Burn, you little." "Next one," Harker barks. "Don't admire it." Reyes shifts to the second tank, fires, misses short, sand and cane erupt. The Japanese tank slews, trying to angle away, but now it's being hit from 3 sides. Other LVTA, -4 seconds along the line, are firing too, their stubby 75 seconds thumping in an overlapping rhythm. The Hago staggers, then collapses in the cane like a pinned beetle. For the first time, Marines have swum their own armor ashore while the beach is still being won. That is new. At Tarawa, the earliest LVTA-1 AM tanks carried 37mm guns, decent against light fortifications, but marginal against anything armored, and they were thin-skinned enough that a lucky anti-tank round or even concentrated machine gun fire could gut them. At Saipan, the LVTA -4 seconds are carrying a 75mm howitzer in a turret and thicker plating on the bow. They are still vulnerable. They are still open-topped, which means grenades and mortar fragments are murder. But in these first minutes, they are doing something the doctrine writers in 1942 only dreamed about: delivering direct fire support, inland, before the infantry has even fully shaken itself into squads. That buys time. Time for more waves to get in. Time for Navy beachmasters to start screaming zones and lanes and marking safe passages through still active minefields. Time for corpsmen to start dragging the wounded behind bits of sand and root mass and telling them, stay low, stay quiet, you're not dead. Time for radios to come ashore, because radios are the next weapon the tractors deliver. On Saipan's beach, a Marine radio man from 2/25 4th Marine Division slams down into the sand behind a tangle of roots and whips the long antenna of his SCR-300 into position. He is 19 years old and shaking so hard his teeth chatter, and his helmet keeps slipping down over one eye because the strap is full of sand and sweat. But he gets the handset up. He gets a line. Red Dog, this is Blue 2 actual. Fire mission, over. He's talking to a destroyer offshore that has been idling like an attack dog waiting for someone to point. Within a minute, 5-inch shells are coming in not on the beach, but 200 yards inland into cane fields, into reverse slope trenches where Tanaka is trying to mass his counterattack. That, right there, is the nightmare. Tanaka's counterattack force is being shelled before it even steps off, because the Americans didn't just get men onto the sand, they got communications onto the sand. And they got those radios there in LVTs. He had been promised, in planning meetings, that the Americans would not be able to establish a functioning command net on the beach in the first hour. Their officers and radiomen will be dead in the water, one naval liaison officer had said confidently, tapping ash into a saucer. They cannot coordinate naval fire support while swimming. They are not swimming. They rowed ashore in steel boxes that look like floating barns with treads. And those boxes didn't just carry riflemen. They carried the nervous 19-year-old who is now calmly walking naval gunfire down on Tanaka's reserve assembly point. Tanaka feels the first incoming 5-inch salvo in his chest. The concussions lift sheets of cane like rugs and throw men to the dirt. His ears ring instantly, a high, metallic scream. A runner is shouting in his face, and he can't hear him. He only sees lips moving. He tastes dust and something like pennies. He understands, in that moment, that the fight is no longer about the reef, or the wire, or even the beach. The fight is about depth. Can he keep the Americans pinned to a narrow, fragile strip of sand? Can he kill them faster than they can widen that strip into a foothold? Or are they already too deep to push back without tearing his whole line apart? He signals for his reserve platoons to commit anyway. Because on Saipan, in June 1944, there is no wait and see. There is only hold them here or lose the island. Back on the beach, Ray's LVT is done. The right tread is gone. The bow is half buried. The engine temp is screaming into the red. He's out of 75mm rounds, except for 2. Harker is already waving him down. Abandon gun! We're infantry now! Grab the 30 and move! Reyes climbs out of the turret, legs rubbery, ears buzzing, mouth dry and tasting of explosive residue. For a half second he puts his hand on the scarred hull. It's hot enough to hurt. You did good, he mutters to the machine. Then he jumps down into the sand and becomes one more rifle in the line. That is the last evolution the Japanese never took seriously when they mocked the amtrac at Truk and Roy Namur and Kwajalein. The tractors aren't just steel. They're men. They're crews, trained to fight mounted and then keep fighting on foot. Tarawa forced them to learn that under fire. Saipan proves they've learned it. By 1,000 hours, on the 15th of June 1944, U.S. Marines of the 2nd and 4th Divisions have a continuous, if shallow, lodgment on Saipan's western shore. It is not pretty. It is not clean. It is not where the map arrows said it would be. It is full of dead and wounded. But it exists. It is anchored by surviving LVT, -4 seconds, by improvised sand and log positions, by radios talking directly to naval guns and carrier pilots, and by Marines who have already beaten back the first local counterattack. The first 10 minutes are gone. The drive them into the sea moment is gone. And somewhere inland, Captain Tanaka, face streaked with dirt and sweat, finally says it out loud to his adjutant. They are already too deep. He doesn't mean deep inland. He means deep in the island's fate. The story of the amphibious tractor in the Pacific, the amtrac, the alligator, the buffalo, the ugly box with treads, isn't clean. Tarawa proves that. Saipan proves that. Ask any Marine who rode one in. Ask Lieutenant Jack Crowley, 2nd Marine Division, the 20th of November, 1943, Tarawa, who clawed across a coral reef under registered artillery fire and watched amtracs around him roast alive and still forced his own machine up onto Betio's northern shore so men could get off and fight instead of drown. He will tell you that the LVT is not a miracle weapon. He will tell you it's loud, thin-skinned, miserable in heavy seas, terrifying under direct fire, and prone to throwing a tread at exactly the worst possible second. But if you catch him on a quiet night, maybe 2 days after Betio finally falls, and the air still smells like burned oil and meat, and you ask him point blank, "Without the tractors, could you have gotten onto that beach?" He doesn't even think. "No," he says. Ask Corporal Manny Reyes, 4th Marine Division, the 15th of June, 1944, Saipan, who rode an LVTA, -4 inches with shells, walking toward him like white pillars, who watched other LVTs get gutted by coastal guns, who hammered a 75mm howitzer at bunkers and light tanks until his own tractored gun ran dry and then jumped into the sand and kept fighting as infantry. Ask him, days later, after the beachhead is secure, but before the island's interior fighting turns into suicidal bonsai charges and night attacks, so close you can smell the other man's breath. Were we supposed to die in the water? He'll blink like you're stupid. Yeah, he'll say. That was the plan. Their plan. Then he'll jerk a thumb back toward the surf, where wrecked LVT hulls lie half in, half out of the tide, like dead animals with their rib cages pulled open. Those ugly bastards said no. History remembers Tarawa as a bloodbath. It was. In 76 hours of fighting on Betio, from November 2023, 1,943, the 2nd Marine Division suffered more than 3,000 casualties. Japanese defenders, roughly 4,500 sailors, naval infantry, and labor troops, fought almost literally to the last man. The water around the reef ran red. A sandbar that should have killed the first wave instead became a graveyard of amtracs that died doing something that had never been done before, driving an assault force across an exposed lagoon, over a reef at low tide, into the teeth of fixed defenses that had been built for a year specifically to stop that exact thing. Tarawa was supposed to prove that a fortified atoll, properly prepared, could not be taken by frontal assault. It proved the opposite. Saipan, June-July 1944, is the next escalation. It isn't an airstrip on a coral strip in the Gilberts. It's the Marianas, the inner ring, the line Tokyo swore Americans would never cross. The Japanese 31st Army and elements of the Imperial Navy base forces on Saipan were told they would destroy the invasion at the beaches and bleed the rest inland. Instead, in the first hours of the 15th of June, 1944, Marines rode in over reefs the Japanese had counted on. Under fire, the Japanese had plotted to the meter, in vehicles those same Japanese officers had once laughed at in briefing rooms, slow, unarmored, easy to burn, and they did not stop. They brought infantry. They brought direct fire, 75 seconds. They brought radios. They brought momentum. Saipan falls after weeks of brutal inland fighting, not hours on the reef. That's the point. Once the United States holds Saipan, the U.S. Army Air Forces can base B-29 super fortresses within range of the Japanese home islands. From that moment, June 1944, the clock is running in Tokyo in a way it never ran before. You can draw a line, literally, on a map from a sweating Amtrak driver in a tanker helmet grinding his treads over live coral at Tarawa to incendiaries blooming over Tokyo 9 months later. That's not exaggeration. That's logistics. Because strategy is not just ideas. Strategy is delivery. The LVT is delivery. It takes an abstract promise. We will seize forward bases in the Central Pacific, bring bombers into range, and strangle Japan's war economy, and makes it physical, in the ugliest possible way. A steel box shuddering through chest-deep water, while men in the back vomit into their own boots and clutch their rifles like rosaries, and a driver up front mutters, "Just get me there, just get me there, just get me there." Through teeth he can't unclench. From the Japanese perspective, that's the real horror. Not that Americans can land. They always knew Americans could land. Americans have ships, guns, planes. The horror is that Americans can land through a place that was designed to be impossible and then repeat it 6 months later on an even harder beach with more guns pointing at them and refine it. After Tarawa, Japanese staff officers could say, "We underestimated the tractor. We will adjust. We will kill them faster on the next island." After Saipan, there is no next island that saves you. After Saipan, it's Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and those are all nightmares for both sides. But they are no longer theoretical. The machine works. The conveyor belt from transport to reef to sand to inland roadblock is ugly and expensive and bleeding, but it is reliable. That reliability is what breaks Japanese planning. There's a detail that doesn't make recruiting posters, but the men who were there remember it. At Tarawa, some of the first-wave Amtrak drivers, once they dumped their Marines on Betio's beach, didn't stay in cover. They turned back around into the lagoon, into the fire. They went back out to get more Marines, more ammo, more water. Some made 5, 6, 7 runs under direct fire before their LVT finally took a round it couldn't shrug off and died under them. A few literally burned to the waterline, still trying to coax forward motion out of an engine that was already on fire. Why? Because if the first wave was wiped out alone, the landing would fail. If the first wave was reinforced and resupplied, held together, linked by radios and guns, then even a 100-yard deep bite of beach could become a knife stuck in the enemy's ribs. That is the part of the story the Japanese truly had not calculated when they mocked the tractor. They thought in terms of repel landing craft. The Marines were thinking in terms of sustain a beachhead under fire in real time. Different problem, different solution. By the time officers like Tanaka and Nakamura on Saipan are watching LVTA, -4 seconds, belch 75mm shells into their forward trenches, and Marine radiomen call, destroyer, gunfire, from behind a dune they shouldn't have reached. Yet, the joke has curdled. The tractors aren't clunky anymore. They're inevitability with treads. And inevitability is the one weapon you can't counter once it's already on your beach.